The strange part wasn't what she said during that coffee date. It was what she didn't say. And somehow that silence ended up changing the way I see people. A few years ago, I thought I understood people pretty well. Not perfectly, obviously, but well enough. I worked as a project coordinator at a mid-sized marketing company in Chicago. My job involved talking to clients, handling deadlines, smoothing out conflicts between designers and managers. After a while, you start believing you can read people. Tone of voice, body language, the small pauses between words. I told myself I was good at it. The strange part wasn't what she said during that coffee date. It was what she didn't say. And somehow that silence ended up changing the way I see people. A few years ago, I thought I understood people pretty well. Not perfectly, obviously, but well enough. I worked as a project coordinator at a mid-sized marketing company in Chicago. My job involved talking to clients, handling deadlines, smoothing out conflicts between designers and managers. After a while, you start believing you can read people. Tone of voice, body language, the small pauses between words. I told myself I was good at it. In my personal life, I applied the same logic. If someone was late, they probably didn't value your time. If someone was quiet, they were probably distant or uninterested. If someone canceled plans, they likely didn't care that much. Simple cause and effect. At least that's how it seemed. One Thursday afternoon, a coworker named Melissa stopped by my desk. "Hey," she said casually, leaning against the divider. "Do you still meet new people through that app you mentioned?" I nodded. "Sometimes. Why?" "My friend Claire just moved to the city," she said. "She doesn't know many people yet. I told her Chicago can feel kind of overwhelming at first." I shrugged. "Sure. What's she like?" Melissa paused for a moment. "Quiet," she said, "but nice." That description didn't exactly give me much to work with. Still, I wasn't opposed. I'd gone on enough coffee dates that they felt pretty low stakes. Worst case scenario, you drink a latte, talk about work, and go your separate ways. So Melissa gave Claire my number. A few days later, we texted and agreed to meet on Sunday morning at a small coffee shop near the river. The place was one of those cozy neighborhood cafes. Wooden tables, soft music in the background, people working on laptops like they had nowhere else to be. I arrived a little early and grabbed a table near the window. Around 10 minutes later, Claire walked in. I recognized her immediately from the photo Melissa had shown me. She looked around for a second before spotting me. When she approached the table, she gave a small, polite smile. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I replied, standing up briefly. "Nice to meet you." She sat down across from me, placing her bag gently on the floor. Right away, I noticed something. She seemed careful. Not nervous exactly, just deliberate. The way she spoke, the way she held her hands, even the way she looked around the cafe felt slightly measured, like she was paying attention to details most people ignored. We ordered coffee and started talking. At first, everything was normal. Where she moved from, what she studied in college, how Chicago compared to her old city. But after a few minutes, I began to feel something I couldn't quite explain. The conversation felt uneven. I'd ask a question, and she'd answer politely, sometimes thoughtfully, but she rarely asked anything back. Not in a rude way, just quietly. I remember thinking, okay, maybe she's shy. So I kept the conversation going. I talked about work, the city, my weekend routine. Every now and then she'd nod, smile slightly, or say something short. But there were also moments where she just listened, longer than most people would. At one point, after I finished explaining a project deadline that had been stressing me out, she looked down at her cup and didn't say anything for several seconds. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was unusual. I remember thinking, does she even want to be here? That thought sat quietly in the back of my mind. About halfway through the date, something small happened, but it stuck with me. I asked her a pretty normal question. "So what made you decide to move to Chicago?" She hesitated, just for a second. Then she said, "A job opportunity." Her voice was calm, but something about the way she said it felt incomplete. Most people would add details, excitement, complaints about the weather, something. But she stopped there. The silence stretched a little longer than expected. My brain immediately started filling in the blanks. Maybe she's not interested in talking. Maybe she regrets coming. Maybe this whole thing is awkward for her. I felt that familiar instinct again, the one that tries to analyze people, the one that turns small signals into conclusions. So I changed the subject. We talked about coffee, books, neighborhoods. The conversation slowly found a rhythm again. But every now and then she'd go quiet in the same thoughtful way, listening, observing, almost like she was processing things more carefully than the rest of us usually do. After about half an hour, we both finished our drinks. People in the cafe were starting to cycle out, new faces replacing old ones. I figured that was probably the natural end of the meeting. "So," I said casually, "I'm glad we got to meet." She smiled again, that same small smile. "Me too." There was a pause. Then she said something that surprised me. "Can I tell you something a little strange?" I laughed lightly. "Sure." She took a breath. "I sometimes worry people think I'm not interested in them." I didn't expect that. "Why would they think that?" I asked. She looked down at the table for a moment. Then she said quietly, "Because I take longer to respond sometimes." I waited. She continued, "When I was younger, I had a brain injury from a car accident." Her tone remained calm, almost matter of fact. "I recovered pretty well," she said, "but one thing that stayed with me is that my brain processes conversations a little slower." She looked up at me. "So when someone tells me something, I'm usually thinking about it carefully, but from the outside, it probably looks like I'm just sitting there." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. She wasn't telling the story for sympathy, that was clear. She was explaining, quietly, honestly. "I didn't want to say that right away," she added. "Sometimes when people hear it, they start treating me differently." Something about that sentence landed heavily in my mind, because suddenly, a lot of things made sense. Those pauses, the quiet listening, the longer silences, they weren't signs of disinterest, they were signs of effort. And I felt a small, uncomfortable realization creeping in. I had already interpreted those pauses. I had already built a story about them. A completely wrong one. I remember sitting there staring at the half-empty coffee cup in front of me, and I thought about how quickly my brain had jumped to conclusions, how confident I'd felt in my ability to read people. All those assumptions, all those quiet judgments, they felt logical at the time, but they were based on almost nothing. Claire took another sip of water and said something that stayed with me. "Most people move through conversations really fast," she said, "but I actually like taking time to think about what someone says." She smiled slightly. "It makes people interesting." That sentence flipped something in my head, because suddenly I realized something strange. During that entire coffee date, she had probably understood me better than I understood her. She had been listening, really listening, while I was busy interpreting. After that moment, the conversation changed. Not dramatically, but subtly. I asked questions differently, I slowed down a bit, and when she paused before answering, it didn't feel awkward anymore. It felt thoughtful. We ended up talking for another 40 minutes, about books, about cities, about how people assume things about each other every single day without realizing it. Eventually, we stood up to leave. Outside, the air was cold, and the street was quieter than usual for a Sunday. Before we said goodbye, she said something simple. "Thanks for being patient with me." That sentence bothered me in a strange way, because I hadn't been patient. Not really.
I had just been lucky enough to hear the explanation before my assumptions hardened into something worse. I walked home that day thinking about how many conversations I'd probably misunderstood in my life, how many quiet people I'd labeled as distant, how many pauses I'd mistaken for indifference. It's strange how confident we can feel about reading human behavior. We build entire narratives from tiny clues: a delayed text, a quiet response, a short answer, and most of the time, we never learn the real story behind those moments. We just keep believing the version we invented. That coffee date didn't turn into a relationship. Claire and I stayed in touch for a while, but life eventually pulled us in different directions. But the lesson from that morning stuck with me. Because empathy, I realized, isn't just about understanding people's feelings. Sometimes it's about questioning the story you've already told yourself about them. And every now and then, when someone pauses a little longer than expected, I remember that coffee shop, and I wonder how many hidden explanations exist behind the quiet moments we rush to judge.